Hello, my name is Nigel Thorne. I'm from Wales and I have concerns about the Welsh Government's Relationships and Sexuality Education Code. Across the Western world, more and more young people are seeking sex reassignment surgery. Last year, over 5,000 children and adolescents were referred to GIDS, the Gender Identity Development Service. This compares to just 250 referrals just 10 years previously. The trajectory is upwards and shows no sign of abating. In the United States alone, it was reported that sex reassignment surgery market was valued at $1.9 billion in 2021, and it's expected to expand at a compound annual growth rate of 11.23% from 2022 to 2030. The growing market is in the sex reassignment of young people, not adults. In a previous video, I explored how queer theory has influenced the development of the new RSE code in Wales. Queer theory is a philosophy that aims to undermine heteronormativity, the perception that to be normal, boys must be masculine and sexually attracted to girls, and girls must be feminine and sexually attracted to boys. This philosophy is promoted by American academic Judith Butler. In her highly influential work Gender Trouble, Butler referred to this as the heterosexual matrix. As Butler writes in Gender Trouble, the naming of sex is an act of domination and compulsion. The category of sex is a name that enslaves. The straight mind, evident in the discourses of the human sciences, oppress all of us, lesbians, women and homosexual men. The underlying premise of queer theory is that power lies within language, and by forcing a change in the language that is used, perceptions can be changed. If perceptions are changed, people's behaviour will be liberated from social expectations. To undermine the heterosexual matrix, Butler proposes the dissemination of teaching that reduces the significance of sex and elevates the significance of gender. The new RSE code was developed by Professor Emma Reynolds, an academic from Cardiff University and a huge advocate of queer theory. In 2006, an article of hers was published in the British Journal of Sociology of Education. The article was titled, "They Won't Let Us Play Unless You're Going Out with One of Them. Girls, Boys and Butler's Heterosexual Matrix in the Primary Years." In her article, Reynolds suggests that children's relationships in their early years is problematic. It is too heteronormative. Reynolds writes, to conclude, paying attention to how discourses of sexuality and gender interact and intersect with generational discourses is a necessary analytic step in exploring how Butler's hegemonic heterosexual matrix informs our representations of and research into children's gender, sexual relations and identity work. Such analysis would involve close scrutiny of the complex and often contradictory accounts of how boys and girls from infants to teenagers are positioned and actively position themselves in a hegemonic heterosexual matrix, and thus in turn how the hegemonic heterosexual matrix is mediated through discourses of childhood. She concludes her article with something of a mission statement. The heteronormativity of gender relations in the early years is certainly ripe for some gender trouble, and some of this work is well underway and radically disrupting a range of gender and sexual truths in what might be more fittingly described as the heteroformative years. Queer theory has been extraordinarily influential across society. Dr. Iggy Moon is chair of the Coalition Against Conversion Therapy. This is what she has to say about gender.
about gender ideology. It's about us all being able to understand the expansive way that we need to think about gender. It doesn't belong to anybody in particular. It doesn't need to be in a binary, which is inherent from history and colonialism. It's a more expansive, free-thinking idea that we need to put into our understanding of psychology, into our understanding of therapy, in order that we can explore with clients, with young people, their freedom to be able to be who they wish to be.
Within the RSE code, there is no mention at all of the words male, female, man, woman, boy or girl. There are, however, 17 references to the word gender. In the Designing Your Curriculum page on the Hub website, the word sex is defined as something that is attributed to someone, rather than as being an immutable aspect of being human. In another video, I explored how young people at an age when their identity is being formed have been influenced by both Butler's idea and social media to develop what is known as gender identity ideology, the belief that all of us have an innate gender identity that may or may not align with our sexed body. It is worth reflecting on that idea for a moment. I am cognitively aware that I am male. In that way, it could be said I have a gender identity that is male in the same way that I have a hair colour identity that is brown. But that's not what's meant by gender identity. I have bodily experiences that a male, that a woman cannot have. In that way, it could be said that I have a gender identity that is male that I share with other males, but not with females. But that's not what's meant by gender identity. What is meant by gender identity is something that lies outside of the body, a gendered soul, a metaphysical essence of maleness or femaleness. This is an extraordinarily dangerous belief to be teaching our children. In the Designing Your Curriculum page on the Hub website, the word gender is defined as being often used to refer to whether someone identifies as female, male, or non-binary. Two researchers, Shay Woolahan and Hannah Borelli, investigated the role of Tumblr, a social media site popular with teenage girls, in the popularisation of gender identities. This is an extract from their presentation at the LGBT Alliance conference in 2022.
The gender label non-binary, which has a completely different meaning depending on who you ask, was popularised on Tumblr. One self-identified non-binary activist said, "While non-binary identities have existed for centuries prior to Tumblr, there is no doubt that the microblogging site helped to facilitate non-binary's transition from an online underground identity to a mainstream one with offline consequences."
So now Stonewall is lobbying for legal recognition of non-binary identities through reform of the Gender Recognition Act. Remember that this was an identity that was popularized by teenage girls on Tumblr in 2013.
In their LGBTQ+ Action Plan for Wales, published in July 2021, the Welsh Government committed themselves to provide recognition of non-binary people throughout devolved policy areas, including education, housing and health, as far as possible under the law. In July 2020, Jeremy Miles, then the Welsh Government Consul General and Minister for European Transition, and Jane Hutt, Deputy Minister and Chief Whip, published a statement in support of trans communities. The statement included the following profession of faith. We believe trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary identities are valid. In June 2022, First Minister Mark Drakeford stated that trans women are women.
So my starting point is the same as Penny Mordaunt, the UK minister responsible at the time, who said that the UK government's starting point was that transgender women are women. And that's my starting point in this debate.
Whether the Welsh Government recognise it or not, these statements come straight out of queer theory. Parents are right to be concerned as to whether this ideology will be taught to children in Welsh schools, because material that does uncritically teach this ideology is commonplace. In a judicial review of a legal case brought by concerned parents against the Welsh Government in November 2022, the barrister representing the government stated, "Paul Diamond didn't like transformative. But it's not indoctrination, it's empowering learners and developing their critical thinking. Positive outcomes of RSE in guidance, reducing bullying, informed decisions about reproductive health, promote equality, sex and gender. How can this be objected to? People do identify as different genders." His reference is to the sentence on the Designing Your Curriculum page on the Hub website that states, "RSE has the potential to be transformative for learners and communities. It is important in empowering learners and in developing their critical thinking." The fundamental premise underlying queer theory is that language shapes our reality. The queer theory proposed by Butler aims to subvert the meaning of words. If a trans woman is a woman, then what is a woman? If male is a gender identity, then what is male? Critical thinking requires fixed meanings for words. The Welsh Government cannot have it both ways. They cannot claim to champion children's critical thinking and at the same time remove the tool on which critical thinking depends. The government are endorsing resources that actively undermine critical thinking. One of those resources is Agenda, created by Professor Reynolds and available for the teaching of RSE to secondary school pupils in Wales. It is available on Hub, the government education website. It has been endorsed by Cardiff University, the NSPCC, the former Children's Commissioner for Wales, Welsh Women's Aid and the Welsh Government. There are two versions of this resource. The one referenced on Hub is the 2016 version and it runs to 76 pages. This version is also referenced in the help pages of Spectrum, a Welsh Government funded project for all secondary and primary schools in Wales. In 2019, an expanded version of Agenda was released. This is available on Agenda Online. It runs to 171 pages. It has been endorsed by the same organisations, plus the National Education Union. In a report submitted in March 2021 to the Welsh Government by a highly influential government-appointed expert panel that advises on LGBTQ+ issues, it states, "The Welsh Government to provide statutory national trans guidance for schools and local authorities. There is a need for a trusted national information resource. Every child has the right to access these valuable resources. The design of these resources should be developed in conjunction with organisations with expertise in this area and build upon inclusive, co-produced resources such as the Agenda resource. www.agendaonline.co.uk. There is a massive push for this resource to be used in schools in Wales. However, it is difficult to see how this resource can be used to develop critical thinking in our children, unless it is used as a case study in how to identify ideological propaganda. On page 106 of the resource, it states, "Trans men are men, even if you don't like them. You don't understand why they're trans. You don't think they're trans enough. This is dogmatic assertion accompanied by moral coercion. What pupil would be brave enough to challenge that? So much for critical thinking. On page 152 of the resource, youngsters are invited to check out the Gender Unicorn to learn more about sex and gender. This resource has been put in cartoon form by Ollie Pike in a series of videos he has made for children called Pop and Ollie. Mr. Pike's qualification for teaching young children about their psychology is a degree in drama. Pop and Ollie is the resource recommended by the Scottish Government.
Gender identity. So gender identity is someone's internal sense of being male, female, neither of these, both, or another gender or genders. Gender identity is basically what you just know that you truly are, because you can just feel it. For me, Ollie that is, my gender identity is male. Mostly. Everyone has a gender identity, including you.
The resource tells us that female, woman and girl, and male, man and boy are not necessarily linked to each other, but are just 6 common gender identities. This is not fact. This is an ideology. The resource continues, sex assigned at birth. The assignment and classification of people as male, female, intersex or another sex, based on a combination of anatomy, hormones, chromosomes. It is important we don't simply use sex because of the vagueness of the definition and its place in transphobia. Straight out of queer theory, this is policing of our language. This is the first social justice movement in history that makes it taboo to mention material reality. So much for critical thinking. Stonewall recommend that teachers use the Gender Unicorn for pupils with special educational needs. The interim CAS report stated that approximately 1/3 of children and young people referred to GIDS have autism or other types of neurodiversity. On page 137 of the resource, there is a reference to Alex Drummond, a biological male with penis, testicles and beard, who has been invited to talk in a Cardiff school about his experiences of being a lesbian. Where did Mr. Drummond get the idea he was a lesbian?
I mean, I'd never even heard of transgender before the age of 40, and it was only when I was researching gender theory as part of my master's that I discovered all this amazing science.
So queer theory. So much for critical thinking. On page 152 of the resource, there is a reference to the Transform Toolkit, a document produced by Youth Cymru and funded by the Welsh Government. The document contains a reference to a sexual health booklet produced by Gendered Intelligence. The sexual health booklet states, "The fundamental thing to take away from this is that you are still you. How you look, how you speak, and how you have sex are all aspects of you, but your identity is paramount. A woman is still a woman, even if she likes getting blowjobs. A man is still a man, even if he likes getting penetrated vaginally. How you have sex need not affect your identity." The chief executive of Gendered Intelligence is Jay Stewart, a trans man with a doctorate in visual cultures from Goldsmiths University. The thesis he submitted as part of his doctorate was entitled Trans on Telly. The thesis cites Judith Butler 72 times. Queer theory. So much for critical thinking. On page 108 of the resource, there is a link to a document entitled What is Genderqueer? Pupils are informed that genderqueer can enable individuals to flexibly explore their gender over time, experimenting and changing as they go. This is gender identity ideology. So much for critical thinking. On the same page, there is a link to a document entitled A Trans Review of 2017, the Year of Transgender Moral Panic. The first item listed that caused a moral panic was a BBC documentary that raised concerns that a highly political movement was detrimentally impacting the appropriate treatment of children struggling with gender dysphoria. In July 2022, it was announced that the Gender Identity Service for Children was to close, after criticisms of the service made in a report by Dr. Hilary Cass. Dr. Cass's report stated, "Aspects of the literature are open to interpretation in multiple ways, and there is a risk that some authors interpret their data from a particular ideological and/or theoretical standpoint." So much for critical thinking. In a mock comments section anticipating pushback from parents, the resource states, "The point of agenda is to suggest some creative, open-ended and non-judgmental ways to respond to what students bring, not to impose anything on them, except perhaps for the beliefs that everyone has a gender identity. The word sex is transphobic. Trans men are men. A woman can have a penis. A man can have a vagina. Sex reassignment surgery is normal. And people who are concerned about the medicalization of our young people are part of a moral panic." So much for critical thinking. If we accept queer theory into our schools, we are indulging a fiction. If we indulge a fiction, we are denying reality. If we deny reality, there will be consequences. Tumblr is less popular now. Young people are instead frequently to be found on TikTok, where enterprising surgeons are selling their services to impressionable youngsters.
You wanna put a ring on my finger, Put it on and make him wanna marry me. Yeah. Put it on and make him wanna marry me. Yeah. Put it on and make him wanna marry me. Yeah. Put it on and make him put it on and make him put it on and make him wanna marry me. Yeah. Put it on and make him wanna.
Parents may wish to check what their children are being taught in school.
For who we are, that's supporting us for who we want to become regardless of our gender.
Start respecting everyone's unique talent and start supporting equality and happiness. Stand down and nominate.
Start making peace in the world. Listen to us, what we're saying right now.
Public Child Protection Wales are challenging the new curriculum. Link to the website is included below.